Okay, so the shrinking adaptation in the fourth hub, let's get into it. I was thinking about this today, and before I jump into this, I was thinking about it how the adaptations, specifically the adaptations for each hub, both shrinking and inflating, um, as this practice is kind of like living in the world with people, as my own experience and work with it is evolving, my relative importance around it is kind of shifting. And I just want to emphasize before getting into this is that for these adaptations, the intent is essentially to look for the behavioral patterns that result from the interruptions, and specifically because, like, in the early hubs, specifically in the early hubs, because the patterning, the reflex formation and the belief systems are formed before episodic memory, which is just starting to come on board with the in the fourth hub, that the evidence is found more in the behaviors that we exhibit now, and that is, like, that providing some help and assistance in this process of seeing how we adapted and being able to trace back to the root, so to speak, and find and see that, as far as even, like, the kind of parinama tangle, like, just get in, like, more of a sense and more evidence around that some of these behaviors that we think are our personality, or this is just who I am and what I'm like, are actually adaptations, and they're malleable. And it's not in my experience that they completely disappear, but they become more dynamic and our capacity in the hub expands. And in the fourth hub, it's pretty important, because it's kind of like the culmination of everything that, it's like the first, second, third hub has delivered us to this place of, like, where we connect with the world, and ultimately emanating from the connection that we have with ourselves. Which has been, in my own, in my own sort of journaling and processing, I've been thinking a lot and noticing a lot about how these fractured and even contrarian or conflicted aspects within ourselves that are cultivated by certain institutions in culture, like in our culture, like politics, things that divide us, are taking advantage of fear and shame within ourselves that's dividing our internal relationship with ourselves. So it's like the fear relationship being about building trust within ourselves, finding that trust within ourselves, and having that in effect be what is projected into the world and reflected back to us. And also, reduction in shame, or, illumination if possible, which is the idea that really, like, what we're doing is, we're becoming, like, what's the flip side? It's pride, self-esteem. And that self-esteem is, like, forgiving, I think another way to even look at it, adaptations, and this is something that's arising in my own practice, is, in this in this kind of like internal, and we'll get into this because, like, envy and jealousy show up in the shadows of this hub, and we'll talk more about that soon. But just even our relationship with being, like, how we envy and jealousy, and, like, what that is as being, something that's moralized. So once we get into the shadows here, it gets interesting because, like, grief is in the shadow in terms of being, a part of ourselves that gets kind of buried. But as I really, like, bring forward envy and jealousy as, once again, similar to other shadows, is that they actually have a purpose in terms of, like, showing us things in a particular way. We'll talk about that later. Ugh, okay. Yeah, I went on a tangent there, but really, like, so at the end of the day, like, what we're looking for is the evidence of, like, any sense of, like, opposition within ourselves where we're, like, kind of, um we've internalized these divisions because they're happening within us. If we did not have these divisions that had been sewn into us, the ability to act them out, for them to actually be able to exist, in terms of being able to, like, you know, not so possible. Yeah. Because when we can see, kind of where our own behavior is arising from, and even the things that we may be in conflict right now, about certain behaviors, or, like, been, like, moralized, or, whatever. When we can see the innocence and, at the core, the authenticity of our being, and that it's expressing itself through, like, hunger for really, like, innocent needs that arise, and weren't taught how to, like, achieve them, um, and then got shamed, like, it's a pile up. Once what like, this is I'm a little bit fractured here for what ironically, um, but, like, once we, like, heal these, like, fissures within ourselves, it's a lot more difficult to enact them in the world. And I think it's one of the things that, when you look at the institutions of power, it's, like, a really across the board, that one of the commonalities they have in all of their different modalities is to create division, create distrust in yourself. Like, the idea, like, even, like, industrialization, the idea that you're lazy, and that working in this, like, particular way, like, hustle culture and, like, productivity is, like, representing value, like, that all of these things, like, these notions are actually, like, they create dissonance. They enhance dissonance in us. And, of course, so I'm just talking specifically about, you know, like, work, industrialization, business, so to speak. And, of course, there's also, like, religious and political that really do the same thing in just different aspects of ourselves, but certainly find fertile ground in a fractured psyche, certainly, especially with, like, decreased emotional capacity with people. Is like, it's really worth reclaiming. Yeah, and it's hard. So, I mean, the thing is it's hard. This is hard. It's just, it's like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it, and it's hard. It's hard. Um, and it's like an ebb and a flow. It's like a nautilus shell, like, in terms of the chambers have, like, increasing capacity. And so, as we build our capacity in a given hub, that it creates more freedom. And then, at least it's been, my experience, and I see in others, is that then, kind of, like, the next level is presented, which can feel frustrating because it can be like, I thought I already worked this out. And it's like, you did. Now here's the next level for your advancement. So I'm gonna read, let's see what time it is. Okay. So both the shrinking and inflating adaptations can coexist in the same person. A person may appear to be strong and highly guarded, shrinking, as a professional, but in a relationship may give to the point of exhaustion, inflating. There will usually be a dominant adaptation, but the central issue is ultimately a defense against the sense of unworthiness or feeling unlovable experienced in both adaptation patterns. So, once again, the adaptations are really floating around, um, like really in popular culture right now, and even referenced in the book with I think it was like Amir Levine's book, The Attachment Styles, just kind of like a popular notion right now. It keeps getting kind of like disproven and whatever. But these are just frameworks. I mean, the thing is like looking at like the anxious, was it anxious, avoidant, insecure attachments, and there's like kind of some um new sort of like sort of broader or more expanded like explanations of these types of attachments. But I think anything that helps open the concepts of self-awareness here. And so what we're talking about in the parlance, if we're like sort of relaying this to like anxious or avoidant attachment styles, shrinking is avoidant. And so the thing is it's kind of like back, if you think back to the first hub, about needing physical needs. And just as an example to start here is like physical needs, like a shrinking adaptation kind of goes, you know what, I just actually don't need that much. And that's the defense, is like reducing the needs. And so that's where you see people like taking up less space, like very excessive minimalism, like hyper budgeting, like a lot of calorie restriction can happen there, things like that. And then on the other side, with inflating adaptation is like, I want to secure myself against loss. I want to really like set myself up so that I'm, like it's like I want to have like so much that I can't run out. And so that like you see like with hoarding, and I'm talking about like really on the far end of the spectrum, but this is like hoarding in all manner of ways, whether it's like hoarding money and feeling like like hoarding excessive amounts of money, hoarding and like belongings. Just a couple examples there. Um, I want to be like mindful of using stuff that is like body manifestations, but this can be about like holding on to body fat as a way of feeling safe. And at the core of the first hub, we have it's like the trust in that our needs, that we have the ability to get our needs met, and for some people, that's more realistic than not. But it's the key thing is that we're internalizing the sense of trust. And so in the fourth hub, this is about our worthiness of love. And so back to the shrinking, where it's like, yeah, I don't need that much. It's the same thing. It's like, actually, I'm good. I'm good. I don't mind being alone. Like, I don't, and it's like, um, and we'll talk more about it, I'm sure, in here. I haven't read it ahead of time per usual. And then inflating is like trying to draw in adoration and become indispensable and and like kind of make yourself like undeniably lovable. More on that later. So I'm going to start reading. Shrinking. Here we go. Okay. Well, I'll keep reading. So a shrinking fourth hub, like the avoidant attachment style I described above, builds excessive walls and protections against intimacy and vulnerability, yet secretly dreams of a perfect love that will save it. And a lot of times that perfect love can be tied to like some things around perfection, like the idea that yeah, that it's like if I look good enough, if I'm successful enough, more on that later, I think. Having been hurt deeply in the early years of this hub's development, the shrinking adaptation protects against experiencing overwhelming hurt and devastation again. Part of the fantasy is that perfect love doesn't cause pain, so that when difficulties arise in a relationship, the search to find the mythical ideal begins once more. So, shrinking characteristics are defensiveness, is like, if I'm being honest, I don't really care, believes love shouldn't require effort, struggles with genuine connection to others, focuses on the measurable value of relationships, can be excessively generous in acute situations, intending to impress, but is generally miserly and calculated when it comes to giving. Struggles with gratitude, is only transiently grateful for big wins and significant gifts. Takes without feeling grateful, can be antisocial, withdrawn, critical, and lacking in empathy. Lives by appearances with an inner world that is neglected and disregarded, tends towards narcissism. An interviewee, Malcolm, a perennial bachelor known for his perfectionism and relaxed charm, was admired by his college friends for having it all. But as his friend group shifted into middle age, the admiration had also shifted to a cautious sympathy as the group watched his revolving door of shallow relationships and his consistently last-minute social cancellations. A friend of Malcolm had remained in contact with a couple of his ex-girlfriends, and they told the same story, a period of seduction and charm that would last 8 or 9 months, followed by Malcolm growing increasingly distant. He told me that his standards are too high. I expect the best of myself and others. I realize this can feel unfair, but my team, this is at work, often tells me I drive excellent performance even though they hate my impossible standards. And, a note was like that Malcolm had high staff turnover, actually. I know the board of directors at my company isn't complaining, end quote. So Malcolm, a textbook case of a shrinking fourth hub adaptation, returned the serve of the sympathy of his college friends had for him. He said, I have a girlfriend who's a model. I drive a Ferrari and I run the top division of my company. To be honest, I feel sorry for them. Not surprising. I mean, it's hard, I read it and it's like, oh yeah, it's like, yeah, no, that's not actually when it's said, it's kind of like, yeah, there's a lot of that. So during the interview, he was at ease and slightly distracted until I asked, do you have any early memories of feeling like more was expected of you than was reasonable for your age? And down the rabbit hole we went. Malcolm's father had been tough on him. Yet with his sister, he'd been affectionate and without standards. Quote, when Malcolm cried after losing a Little League game, his father was disgusted. When they got home, he told him he was far too old to be crying. His mother said nothing, but after his dad left the room, she gave Malcolm a popsicle and a pat on the shoulder. He said, I used to feel like I might be able to win his approval with my success, but now that I have surpassed him professionally, it's like we've entered into a new difficult dynamic. It feels unwinnable. So Malcolm opened up during our conversation, albeit on his terms. He swatted away any questions he sensed as me trying to push him. I quickly learned that it would go better if I showed respect and appreciation for what he had to say. So addressing flaws or faults was off limits, except for one or two that he seemed to have rehearsed counters to. So the shrinking fourth hub struggles to give or feel empathy because as children they didn't receive it from the people who mattered most. Criticism and judgment are sometimes positioned as care, such as when Malcolm pitched his impossible standards as good for his staff. He didn't seem to consider that his staff members, in light of his punishing conditions, could be telling him about high performance in the hope of minimizing the risk of his retribution or criticism. So in relationships, the shrinking fourth hub will expect to be saved by perfection. anticipating a partner to rescue them by pouring energy into the relationship, while the shrinker risks almost nothing by remaining emotionally protected. So, in the initial phase of a relationship, a deep hope of being rescued from loneliness will elevate the shrinker as it briefly believes it is finally being saved. A period of idealized romanticism will be followed by a shift into criticism and distance, which is often a shock to the partner because it seems to come out of nowhere. So, in the early days of a relationship, the shrinking, avoidant adaptation will tend to move fast, dazzling the would be conquest with adoration, as the thrill of the hunt is often mistaken for early love. But once effort and vulnerability are required, the shrinker becomes overwhelmed, frustrated, and bored. Having hope that this time love could cure the loneliness, this person may even become cruel, blindsiding the partner. It's difficult to understand that shrinking in this hub cannot be healed through surrogacy. Adult partners can't fill in for parents who are unable to love. Important. It's really important. Building strength in this hub is like building physical fitness. A personal trainer can motivate you, but can't lift the weights for you. Loving someone with this pattern gets distressing because there's a sense like hearing their cries for love from behind a wall. It's confusing and can be mistaken as encouragement. For someone trying to break through them, these walls of perfectionism, judgment, and impossible standards will punish persistence. Shrinking adaptations tend to avoid seeking the help of therapy. The fear of revealing imperfection, of being exposed as flawed, or a subconscious fear of being seen as fundamentally unworthy drives their avoidance to seek help. Okay, so one of the things I want to point out about that section is that most is written from I guess you call it a first person perspective, where it's written about experiencing this from the inside out. Very specifically, and this is not to say this is like was the correct way or the incorrect way. It's just kind of like how it happened was that this really wound up being like I guess one of the things was is that it like the perspective of everyone I talked to that kind of represented this and the more I got into it, I just saw that this was like more of an adaptation that doesn't necessarily get involved with trying to do this kind of work. It's kind of common. I mean, it's similar to an inflating adaptation in the second hub. This is written more from a like the especially the end here, which is honestly, it's kind of like I think one of the things is that this feels like a person, like I think this kind of like dips its toe in the notion of like narcissism that's spoken about a lot now in popular culture. It's kind of a buzzword. But narcissism is ultimately like how I kind of view it is that your inner life was just not cultivated and that you were loved and appreciated and recognized for things that were on the surface or things that related to what other people wanted from you. So as a result of that, it's just a very like the sense of self is really undernourished. So the capacity for love um is impacted by that, and it's a really hard shift to it's a really hard thing because it's someone who's like it's an adaptation that's so afraid of weakness, and that in order to solve for it, actually needs to like face down this particular weakness. It's like disgusted, by it. So spending time with it is, is like, is challenging. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because loving someone, I think that just being really aware of the capacity and, like, what a shrinking adaptation represents is that the person does want love, just the path to it is, it's kinda like the thought that just came up to me was, like, it's kind of like a garden that has, like, overgrown with, like, thorns to get access to, but there's a garden. Yeah, but, I mean, look, it's but the key thing here is this isn't surrogacy work, like, you cannot love a person with this adaptation, like, open, like, you can have moments where, like, this adaptation experiences moments of opening. But there's so many other conflicting aspects of hubs that are, like, really, like, require a lot of airspace that will crowd it out and like, create a lot of recoil around that, so, yeah, and here's the thing, this is, like and I kinda just wanna lean back into this thing of, like, these are just kind of like thought exercises about these hubs. I don't really wanna present this as being like, this is like an end all be all. If anything, it's just looking at, like, what are the behavior patterns and just being able to cognitively understand them as they relate to a hub and see them within ourselves, and I've made the exception here with the, shrinking is talking really about what it's like to be with somebody or interact with somebody. But if you are I mean, it's really hard. I mean, if you have had shrinking people in your life, it's like it's really sad because it can be really sad because you can see the need for love, but the capacity to be able to, like, do it is really challenged. And, of course, they're lovable, which makes it even harder, as far as yeah, because everybody's lovable. They're lovable because everybody's lovable. Inherently, but, part of this is, like, having the types of relationships that are reciprocal and present and grow us and are kind to us and don't hurt us, so, anyway, so that is it for me for now. I'm gonna sign off, and I will see you on the other side. Looking forward to it. Bye.